This week on Monero Talk is sponsored by Cake Wallet. Store, send, receive, and exchange your Monero safely on your iOS and Android too. Cake Wallet is open source, and you always control your own keys and seed. And by xmr.to. Anonymously exchange your Monero into Bitcoin and seamlessly send Monero to any Bitcoin address. Go to xmr.to or use it right in your Cake Wallet. Cake Wallet and xmr.to are trusted and verified by the Monero community. Monero Talk is also made possible from contributions by viewers and listeners like you. This week on Monero Talk, Douglas Tuman interviews Amir Khazaieli, CEO of Alphamine, and Brad Yasar, an OG Bitcoiner since 2009 and influential investor in the cryptocurrency space. Doug, Amir, and Brad discuss Bitcoin maximalism, if Monero is living up to its value proposition of being a tool that is decentralized, censorship-resistant, unconfiscatable, and if it does it better than other cryptocurrencies. They also talk about Monero mining versus Bitcoin mining, and if privacy and fungibility are critical features for cryptocurrencies to achieve digital gold status. Monero Talk starts now.
Amir, thanks for coming on, guys.
For having us.
Yeah, of course. So this is the Monero Talk show. How is it that you guys are involved in Monero? Are you guys involved in Monero in any way? Matt put me in touch with you. He said you're good folks to speak to in the crypto universe. So you guys have a lot of crypto knowledge.
A little bit.
And so I'm sure there's a lot of things we'll touch upon, but trying to cut to the chase here. Are you guys Monero guys? Are you guys
well, you have
Monero
to define what you mean by Monero guys and the involvement part.
Yeah, are you things. Yeah, okay. Well, all right, let's back up. So what is your current kind of stance on crypto, and what are your beliefs in crypto? What do you guys see as being the value proposition of what cryptocurrency is?
Freedom. Yeah. In one word.
Okay.
So yes, we are Monero guys. I mean, I use Monero quite often and hold some too. But aside from that, in the larger scope of blockchain and crypto, I think we're seeing now more and more the decoupling of Bitcoin from the stock markets and from fiat currencies, and not to make this about just Bitcoin, but it's a good indicator, since that was the original cryptocurrency, on how people who use crypto can shield themselves a little bit from political unrest, social unrest, global pandemics, banking restrictions, traveling restrictions. All these things are imposed on us by third parties, governments, corporations, you name it, that of course have some desire to control different aspects of life for their constituents. And I believe with crypto, we're able to break those boundaries and have freedom, whether it's freedom for me to send you some money without going through 4 intermediaries who take their little cuts and shares every time we transact, or the freedom to have own my own identity, own my own data. The list is long, but in one word, I always think of cryptocurrencies as a tool for freedom.
All right. I definitely agree with you guys there. So how'd you guys get into crypto? What's the background?
I'm a fan of technology in general. So I've been following, development of kind of Bitcoin since about 2011. And, some of these other coins came, as time progressed as well, but really got into it seriously in 2017. So I think my background's in electrical engineering, and today I run a company where we help investors who are looking to, gain exposure to crypto through mining. And so, we got a lot of different I think packages set up and different aspects of the entire mining ecosystem that we've kind of demystified and, make it easier for somebody to come in and understand kind of from a hardware stack perspective, what it means to create these digital currencies and then become an owner through that route. But I think it's just great technology, and I'm a very big fan of technology in general. So that's what drew me in the first place is, we found a way to put value on the internet and, bring a lot of the aspects that were existing in, traditional, currencies and kind of the ideas behind the philosophies behind currency. And now we've implemented them on the internet. So I thought that was pretty cool.
And in 2017, is when you really got into it?
That's when I started, the company that I did. We started Revelux with another partner of mine, and we were shipping GPU-based miners out to consumers, and then we quickly pivoted out of that into Alphamine, which is what I'm doing today. And we're working mostly with institutional clients and helping them with data center placements, 1 to 5 megawatts typically. It's kind of our sweet spot.
All right. And Brad, what's your crypto story? If you could summarize.
Yeah, mine is I just stumbled upon it. A friend of mine sent me 3 files to compile in 2009 and said, Brad, compile these. I'm probably the only person who read Bitcoin's white paper 3 months after starting mining and having actually Bitcoin node running on my computer, because I received it. I was like, this is either a prank and he's going to take control of my computer, or it's something interesting. I put it on a safe environment, ran it, had no clue what it was, but it looked cool. Numbers were growing as I was running a node, and I saw more blocks. Then I started running the miner, and I saw more Bitcoins accumulate in my wallet. Mind you, at those days, it was all command line interface, so there wasn't much to look at. It was just numbers, and I like those things. So that was my start. Then got excited with Litecoin and Mastercoin. I made some friends, got involved with Ethereum's original sale, because that was like, oh, okay, now we can have business cases behind this. With Bitcoin, I tried really hard to be an entrepreneur and start something new, exciting around it, and there really wasn't enough understanding or appetite for it. So I kind of said, okay, I'm just going to mine some and, send it around and talk to my friends about how cool this is, but not really a business case, at least that I could, articulate in a way that was getting people excited. But with Ethereum, that changed with the smart contracts, and then just grew from there. I'm a technologist, I love building stuff. I started building software at a really young age, hardware. And so this was a logical progression of going from the internet era to now.
So
decentralization.
When your friend sent this to you in 2009, did you grasp Bitcoin then? Did you realize what it was attempting to be, or it was just some technology that you were experimenting with, or did you fully?
I want to look cool, so I'm going to say I grasped, but no, I mean, I could.
But did you knew it was like this decentralized form of money? Did you?
So I have a background in banking and finance. I'm an economist by trade. So yes, it was very interesting. It wasn't just like, oh, it's another SETI project that's running on my computer and creating random numbers that I have no clue. No, I kind of understood the potential. I really didn't understand the impact that it's going to have. Otherwise, I would have probably hoarded more Bitcoin from the early days.
When did you start to believe that this thing might actually obtain some value and keep it?
When did Coinbase start? 2011, 12, around that time. A couple really smart and successful people started building businesses that I wanted to build, but again, I wasn't able to articulate it well enough to potential investors and business partners, I guess. So I think, maybe 2-3 years into it, as there was a price associated with it, it started becoming real. Because when I started, Bitcoin's price didn't exist. You could send Bitcoin around, like whole Bitcoins, and no one was fazed about it. They weren't excited. They weren't upset. I mean, it was just like, wow, this is cool. We transferred value. How much value? No one knows. Then when Bitcoin was $100, now people were like, hey, remember that 50 Bitcoin I sent you? Do you still have it? Can I have it back? and yeah, I mean, it started becoming real. And for me, it was always a great opportunity. But I think whenever the price becomes, the market share becomes significant enough that people who are not involved with it from the beginning are paying attention, that's when it becomes validated.
And was your initial drive to, so you started mining pretty early, I assume?
Yes.
So what your initial drive to start mining, was it purely out of a hobby? Like, let me see what happens when I mine, or was it like, oh, let me start collecting these things that might have value?
I'm a gamer. I like collecting digital stuff, even if it has no value in games, other environments, persistent and not. So for me, probably it was the little hoarder gene in me. Like, let me collect as much of this as possible and see, like, gamify it in my head. Like, okay, can I get to, 100 Bitcoin? Can I get to 1,000? Can I get to 10,000? Like, that was the drive. And of course, experimenting with it, sending it, receiving it, trying to see what the infrastructure can do was the other half of the fun.
So obviously, once again, so this is the Monero Talk show. So a lot of this show is always about, talking about Monero and crypto in general, and often comparing Bitcoin to Monero. When I asked you guys the value proposition, you guys kind of both agreed that it's, it's about freedom or liberty. The fact that it's this decentralized system. So that's why I kind of got caught up in Monero, because I think it does that the best. So I'd like to hear your opinion on that, and whether or not you do think, that there is a difference between things like Monero and Bitcoin and other coins in terms of which ones are kind of truly living up to that value proposition of creating a tool that's, decentralized, censorship resistant, unconfiscatable. Do you think Monero does those things well and perhaps better than others, or how do you compare it to Bitcoin? Do you make that comparison?
If either one of us said Monero and Bitcoin are the same, then we don't belong on this show. I mean, then we should just go and take some blockchain 101 classes somewhere. So two completely different beasts. And of course, Monero has a lot more privacy than people thought Bitcoin had originally. You see the pseudo anonymous nature of the transactions with full-on visibility on chain is not privacy. I mean, it's a great starting point as a first draft of something. I think whomever created the code behind Bitcoin's original release is a genius. So that goes without saying. Now, Monero took all the learnings for so many years between Bitcoin and when it was launched and said, hey, everyone thought this was completely anonymous and secretive, and it's not. But when you use paper money, no one is, well, US government is now, but it used to be when you use paper money, it was untraceable. I could give you $1 million in cash and no one else had to know about it. It's my money I'm giving you. Obviously, I'm not, advocating criminal activity or evasion of any sorts. That's not the point. But if we have a legitimate transaction between you and I believe that's just between you and I. No third party needs to monitor it, supervise it, control it in any way, shape, or form, because maybe you're providing services. Maybe you're selling me a good, real estate, whatever it is. And I think Monero brought the needle much closer to that kind of transaction than a Bitcoin transaction, where if I know your wallet, I can see, pretty much what you're doing. I don't know who you're doing it with to a certain extent, but I know what you're doing. So yes, there is a huge difference. And yes, Monero is a big contributor to liberty and being able to transact without worrying about who's monitoring this, who's, keeping tabs on me and what's going on. Amir, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess I will add that I think in my mind, it's a question of compromises and extremes. And I think that Monero, like the community that tends to gravitate towards Monero is typically, and you can see this with kind of like some of the decisions the developers have made, throughout these hard forks, et cetera, is this community who believes in, typically absolute decentralization and complete anonymity. And, a lot of this stuff, not downplaying a lot of the decisions. I think some of them are great, full, if you're going to go for a private blockchain, make the whole chain private versus kind of taking the Zcash model and having this kind of like pseudo private, side blockchain that nobody uses. I think a lot of the decisions make sense. I think when it comes to kind of the development of the blockchain technology, we've seen instances where, sometimes the full on, hardcore 100% decentralization doesn't make the most sense, especially for like industry adoption and like getting the technology out there versus, in some cases it does make sense. And I think being able to have the two working in tandem and being able to switch between the two depending on what you need, I think is a healthy thing. I don't think that I support conversations where they go like, oh, I'm all one way and everything should be that way. I think that there's value in the commercial ecosystem for some things that, exist in blockchain that don't exist in Bitcoin, that don't exist in, like, for example, the Monero blockchain. We can get more specific if you want, but I think at a high level, that's kind of my stance on when you put the two next to each other.
Now about, so you guys talk about privacy, and obviously, I see it that way as well. But also, do you think there's like some critical, features that are necessary? So like fungibility, right? So I kind of see that as being the breakthrough with Monero. Obviously, privacy is what allows for fungibility to essentially exist. But do you think that's critical for digital money to have, for, cryptocurrency to have, something that's trying to be digital gold or digital cash? Do you think it needs to be fungible?
I mean, that goes right back to what I was just saying in terms of like extremes versus compromises. And I think, even on a regulatory level, I know you're running for Congress. So there's this question of, well, if something is completely fungible and it's like on the internet, what stops it from being a great vehicle for money laundering, right? And obviously there's these kind of like lines we got to draw, I guess, either personally, but also as a society, of how comfortable are you with, a technology that enables X, Y, and Z, and if X, Y, and Z includes some really horrible things, I think that question can always obviously get blurred. And I think a lot of people are quick to just talk about it philosophically of like, oh, fungibility, great thing, I want to have, freedom and privacy. I think it's a complicated question though, when it comes to practice.
I think it's like freedom of speech. Right? It's something we all want. So fungibility, we all want. But then when someone starts, creating hate crimes against who you are, and it starts affecting you personally, then you start questioning, well, is absolute freedom of speech, where someone can go and threaten you and say the most horrible things about you as a person, you as a group, as a community, is that okay? And what do we do there? And I'm all for fungibility. So I think that's a great feature. But at the same time, the challenge there is, it's not even policing it, but it's like, if you give total freedom to people, you're giving it to good people, responsible people, as well as, unfortunately, those bad apples that exist in any society. And so they're going to use it for their benefit. Like I always get a little giddy inside when I read these. Oh, Monero was used to launder $1 billion in terrible like drug money or whatever the crime was, or Bitcoin was used to launder $1.6 billion in tax evasion money or things like that. And I'm like, do you guys know how many US dollars, how much money is used to launder and do horrible crimes created by our government? I mean, it's more than a couple billion. It's hundreds, if not in the trillions. We don't talk about it because, again, to a certain extent, we accept that cash is fungible, and there are going to be people who use it to do bad things and pay for bad things. And it's more important to police those activities than police the money itself. And same thing in crypto. I believe, we should have fungibility and not try to monitor the currency just because it's private and works the way everyone wants it to work, but monitor the activities attached to it and the bad actors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. I hear what both of you guys are both saying similar things, and I see it as freedom of speech as well. I often say that, and so Amir, I hear what you're saying with maybe you want that ability to essentially be able to monitor things and censor things. But
I don't know if I said censor things, but
you want to be able to prevent. You don't want a free flowing system where it could be used for evil as easily as it can be used for good.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I think there's value. There's value to the absolute freedom, right? Like
right.
we just discussed. I think there's also value in having because this technology allows us to do things with money that we haven't been able to do before.
Right.
So if we actually in a very systematic way think about creating systems and ways to create boundaries where we can all benefit from that, and again, you go down a rabbit hole here of arguments of okay, who's setting the boundaries and what does it look like when those are misused or abused, etc. I think it's a valid conversation.
Yeah, I think we can compare it to the internet itself, or even just actual speech itself. So it's like we all have free speech in America to some pretty good degree, and we all physiologically have, right? So I could go out and I could shout whatever I want right now. It may get me in a lot of trouble, but I can do it. So imagine though, where we lived in a world where the government literally monitored everything I said every moment of the day, and could step in and catch me if I said the wrong thing at the wrong time. If I ran into a building and yelled fire, right, and caused chaos, wouldn't it, so the Bitcoin version of, but what scares me is the Bitcoin world is that world where every single essentially conversation is being monitored and tracked at all times. And the Monero version is, where we're giving people the liberty to go about and speak freely all the time, but then step in as needed, as we've always traditionally done in the world. So that's why I kind of see Bitcoin as, a slippery slope and a step backwards potentially in terms of liberty and freedom. And that's why, like you mentioned, I am running for Congress, and that's why I have made that, that's a big part of who I am and what has motivated me. And, are you guys both U.S. citizens? Are you guys? So, I mean, in watching Congress thus far, you haven't really seen anybody make those arguments on the floor of Congress, right? So anytime cryptos come up, usually in the form of Bitcoin, and, like Amir's bringing up those questions of, can this tool also be used for bad? The default answer has always been, well, yes, it can, but don't worry. It's actually, completely traceable, and it's actually can be used to help fight crime because we'll be able to track and trace all transactions, and that usually kind of ends the conversation right there on the and people are like, oh, okay, so this Bitcoin thing actually isn't anonymous, it's actually the opposite. And so what I want to see is somebody make the Monero argument, and then when they get pushed to then say, well, no, you're right, it can be used for good and bad, just like the internet can be used for good or bad. Just like I was giving you that other analogy, people can have free thought and they can go out and speak freely. But it's a tool that ultimately, if you believe there's more good in the world than evil, that it will lead to better things, because it's going to allow for this free flow of information. And yes, if people are doing bad things with it, then we'll have to use what we traditionally have always used, which is policing to stop those things. That's my take.
Well, hopefully you will be the one to make that argument in the Congress.
Yeah, I hope. I mean, it's a scary argument to make, because it is a dangerous one. I do understand the fear, but I mean, me philosophically, I do believe that leads to a better world. And I think it comes down to and I think it does align very well with what I believe the purpose and founding of America is supposed to be about, which is this essentially equality and individuality, the ability to be a free thinking individual and to just live your life freely as long as you don't hurt others. And I think Monero really plays into that well.
I think you're braver than I am, because I mean, these questions are never black and white, and that but I guess the principles underlying it, those can be black and white to some degree. And I think it's a hard problem of trying to match up where do your values align and how do you actually implement those with regards to technology, right? And in this case, this technology governs our money and your freedom to another extent, if you just want to generalize out. So I think it's a tough one for sure.
Do you think a lot of people in the crypto space actually share these beliefs we're talking about, or do you think a lot of people really are just driven by, the motivation for, to make money with crypto? Or do you think a lot of people, I think initially there were a lot of fundamentalists around, like the people that started Bitcoin, I would assume really much, believed in, crypto anarchists, they believed in this concept. Today, do you think most people actually still have that belief, or it's really just talked about but not really believed?
Well, I think the crypto community is a smaller representation as the society as a whole. So, there are those who believe in the pure, use cases for crypto, and just like Amir said, there are those people who have absolute beliefs, like it's only Bitcoin or it's only Monero, it's full privacy where I want to do whatever I want and I don't care who gets hurt, or hey, we need to open up and give the government a backdoor so they know everyone and their names and everything is traced because that's the safest way. I mean, there are extremes in everything, and there's the people in the middle. I think originally, because the community was heavy on technologists and cryptographers and people who have a different perspective and understanding, it was more a homogeneous community where you had technologists coming together trying to solve these perceived problems with the market and the monetary systems and things like that. Now it's more mainstream, so I'm sure you'll find people of all beliefs and perspectives in it. Are they the majority? Who knows? I mean, who knows how many people are in the crypto community right now? Is it 100 million? Is it hundreds of millions? Did we reach 1 billion souls globally? I mean, because of this pandemic, we kind of got isolated in our own little, environment. So we don't even know how much it proliferated, other than the news that we receive and what's being shared. But I think it's a large enough community that you're going to find a cross section of all types of perspectives.
And within, like Brad said, this like subset of the community, which of the broader community, I feel like even within the crypto community, there's like another subset of people who are actually concerned with these questions and these ideas and thinking about things foundationally. And then within that, I think this is a problem even with I would say Monero. There's another subset of people who actually are empowered to I would say implement their beliefs and their ideas and to try to be a driving force behind a lot of this development. I think, for example, one example I would give is in the mining world, you take a look at what percentage of miners are actually competent of, you know, what it is that they're doing versus just looking at it in terms of a way to make money, like you were mentioning. But, you know, even a level above that, the people who are competent, what percentage of those are actively voting on blocks and on forks? You know, like, I think it's a very small subset that's kind of driving all of this stuff. And, you know, you see it with, I don't think like it makes sense, you know, like, you know, I think it makes sense for Monero's recent hard fork, for example, right? It makes sense to a lot of different degrees, but on some level, it is, you know, it was already pretty ASIC resistant, right? And now you have this situation where it's pretty much only profitable to mine Monero if you've got like an illegal botnet, right? And you've got this like distributed network of computers that are infected over the globe, and you've got a bunch of tiny CPUs everywhere, and you're able to mine off of that. I mean, I'm sure like, you know, the people who had, you know, institutional level mining installations wouldn't be for this kind of a change, right? But at the same level, at the same time, there's this question within the community of, okay, how much control do we want to give those people, right? Versus like Bitcoin, I keep, that's a bad one to keep mixing up here. But with Bitcoin, you know, there's this clear flaw, you know, if you will, from a lot of perspectives, that a large majority of that mining power is owned by a select few individuals, and you know that has its own implications. And not to mention, a level below that, there's an even smaller handful of manufacturers that can even create these like ASICs, for example, right? And I think again, it comes back to this extremes and compromises, where at different levels, Ethereum has some compromises. You know, being ASIC resistant but still GPU friendly, down to all the way. I think Monero's been like pushing to be on the purest edge of this development in terms of, you know, even now the way that they've implemented the RandomX and ASIC resistance, GPU resistance. I think it's interesting to watch and see how it plays out. And I wonder how that's going to change as more people get informed and this actually becomes a bigger part of everyone's lives moving forward, you know, these cryptocurrencies.
Are you actively mining? Are you, either of you guys, actively mining Monero? Do you guys currently do
dabble.
that? You dabble? I get just based on whether or not it makes economic sense, or what is your dabbling based on?
Well, I've been mining since 2009, so I'll always mine. It's not in really large scale. So as long as my investment in hardware and Amir and I's time investment in the process, building the right setup, maybe the software and things like that makes sense, it's half and half. It has to obviously make economic sense, and then we like supporting certain communities and blockchains. You know, we'll mine stuff not at an industrial level, like, because if you're doing it purely as an economic exercise, then you have your margins, and if you fall below those, you just stop because it doesn't make sense. You know, we've in the past year or so ran mining when we weren't hitting our margins, just to you know, be supportive and contribute to that community. But we experiment with new coins, new privacy coins, as well as open, you know, trackable, traceable ones, just to see how things are evolving. Again, if you're just more mining one asset, you may get really good at it, but you may also get blindsided by some of the newer contenders and newcomers. So we try to keep an eye out on, you know, a subset of ones that are of interest to us, either economically or because they provide privacy, because they have certain functionality that we can either personally use or recommend to our clients. So,
Brad, it's very, how is it that you avoided becoming a Bitcoin maximalist? I mean, so you were there right from the dawn of it. I feel like a lot of people in your position ended up being, you know, BTC maximalists for good reasons. I mean, you know, the network effect, you know, you're entrenched in that. So how did you maintain that openness to development in the crypto community? What is that? It's just your nature, or what was the trick?
I love Bitcoin. Don't get me wrong. Bitcoin and Ethereum are the biggest returns on investment I've ever had in all of my investments. And I'm an angel investor. I'm involved with a couple of VCs. So I do traditional equity investments too, and these have been very, very generous to me. So I guess I think I like experiencing new things. So it's the excitement of the unknown, when like, not to push another privacy coin on your show, but I was very happy with Monero. Then when Grin and Beam popped up, I got involved with those just to see the differences, the similarities, the opportunities. It's just, I think it's in my nature to keep an eye open for new technologies, just because I love technology. Anything new, cutting edge excites me. How to learn it, how to use it, how to incorporate it in my life or businesses, and so that keeps me open to any new innovation that may be superior to what already exists. It doesn't mean I'm going to replace everything. I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm all Monero, I won't touch anything else, because Monero. That's again that absolute, I'm right and you're wrong kind of approach that doesn't serve most people well. So do I like Bitcoin and hold a little bit? Yes, that's a main holding currency for anyone in crypto. Do I think some transactions and some assets are better kept in Monero? Absolutely. That's a different bucket. And I have some Beam because I believe what they're doing and all the integrations and the team behind it, they have really cool ideas. And then you see the cross-pollination of ideas across different privacy chains or across different value capture or reserve chains. And it's really exciting. When Litecoin came out, I was blown away how a very simple change, a very simple tweak to this idea that was Bitcoin made such a huge difference in the experience, the speed, the cost, and everything. I'm like, wow, like, why wasn't Bitcoin Litecoin? I mean, why didn't we start there and then do the other? I mean, you never know how evolution happens. So I try to keep an open mind.
I always find the economic equation coming back after, my enthusiasm kind of runs crazy, pulling back the reins. Like, I got very excited to try and mine Monero, again, going back to the mining thing after December. And no matter what situation I tried to set up, it came back as, the economics don't make sense, as cool as this thing is, and we tried a lot of different out of the box techniques. But yeah, I think in 2017 as well, it was, the whole Ethereum run up happened. And all of a sudden this like GPU mining made so much sense economically. I think that's the one scenario that was reverse, where I was drawn by the economics, but then, being a technophile at heart, I was like, oh, I can start hoarding GPUs and start racking shelves, and you know what I mean? It just kind of...
Now you need to do Raspberry Pis for Monero.
Yeah, now we need
Raspberry Pis.
These NVIDIA, it's like, I don't even know. It's like, it's so hard to, you can invest in some Raspberry Pis now, and the next thing you know, there's going to be another hard fork, and then, we're out of business. And you know what? That's great, because that's what the community wants. But, at the same time, it's a bummer for someone like me, trying to mine currencies and be a supporter, so.
Right. So what do you think about it in terms of what it's trying to achieve? I mean, Amir, you brought up all the points really, but so, I mean, with Bitcoin, we talk about most of the mining being controlled by a few players and the miners, the mining equipment itself. And most of that is coming out of China. Do you think there should be any concern there? Especially, a guy who's running for Congress. I mean, this is something that the U.S. government, would be concerned about, right? So do you think there's a potential for Bitcoin to be co-opted by, a state, for example, China, which already we're seeing like over 2/3 of mining is happening in that country, in a country where we know that they have pretty much ultimate control of all businesses that take place within their geography. Do you guys have any concern there or opinion there?
Well, let me even turn it around to you and ask a simpler question. Aren't you concerned that all the face masks we need and use are manufactured and imported from China right now?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we don't need to talk about Bitcoin and some technology that's optional for most human beings to exist. What about, our clothes and face masks?
Well, no, I think, yeah, of course, those are all major concerns.
Yeah, so the concern is the same. That's what I'm.
Well, I think it's different only in that this is a technology that's striving to be decentralized and not controlled by a state. So, I mean, that's like the essence, the core of what it's trying to do. But could it potentially fail at that?
It could, but I think I'm an optimist, and I know Amir is going to probably give a different perspective, but I'm an optimist, and because it's decentralized, because no one controls it, as far as we know and we can see so far. Obviously, Chinese government or entities can open businesses in different countries and mine there too at a loss just to control the network. Is it probable? Who knows? Is it possible? Absolutely. So there's always a concern of 51% attack. There's always a concern of, who is extracting the most value out of the network. But I think it counterbalances by the good it does. Of all those people who are able to send money cross borders, smaller amounts with smaller fees, and use it for the reasons it was created for. So can we do something about it? Yeah, I mean, I think, in the next 5 years, probably a lot of governments are or large conglomerates are gonna start creating probably mining solutions or internal resources dedicated to that, just to counterbalance the control risk from any entity. It doesn't have to be China. It could be Russia. It could be Australia. I mean, if we're talking about decentralized and freedom, we don't want anyone to control it. But right now, there is a heavy concentration of manufacturers and mining pools in China, and who knows what they're doing with that power.
Now, I think this is one area, and I'm going to echo some of Brad's thoughts here, but go a little bit more on my technical side, nerding out with Bitcoin specifically. I think this is one area where this is a really great example. Like, the regulators drawing boundaries isn't going to solve the problem of China taking over the blockchain versus setting up economic incentives for that to not happen is highly effective. And so, at the end of the day, it's just like Brad said, if somebody wants to do something, especially nefarious, if the incentive is there, they'll find ways to get around you, anything you do to stop them, right? But if it just doesn't make sense, that's a much easier dilemma, for them. And so with Bitcoin, I think they like, again, genius groundwork that was laid. It still needs work, right? Like, today we're starting to see flaws here and there, but the general principle of like the way the halvenings work and the fact that it's not ASIC resistant, I think has had some very interesting, like, when you just take a look at how things have played out. And so, like, when you look at the chip industry and how much investment it takes to own a fab and how much investment it takes to, get a run of, chips or do a new, generation of chip, working with like the handful of fabs that are out there that have the process and the technology, and then like layering down one level after that of, okay, who has the capabilities to integrate these chips, right? And you have a handful of, those are the companies everybody knows, like Bitmain and InnoSilicon, et cetera. And the fact that they have an incentive, just like our traditional chip companies, like you saw with NVIDIA and all these other guys, they have a similar model where they try to milk as much as they can out of their process and their technology with a certain level of chip. And that doesn't always end up in the consumer's favor, right? Like, games might get a lot more complicated, and NVIDIA is still trying to milk their last generation chip off their fab, and until AMD steps in, for example, and offers something that's much better, they don't have the pressure to create that new chip. With Bitcoin, the halvening, I think, and these kind of like economic incentives create a similar model where there's all this investment put into 60 nanometer technology, And then eventually, you know, they can milk it as much as they want, but now there's incentives when it gets cheaper and cheaper for 14 or 10 nanometer. You know, what's Miner or InnoSilicon or MicroBT, you know, these guys step in and try to steal the lunch basically of Bitmain. All the while, the algorithm itself is just making it, you know, an increasingly non-profitable equation to be invested in the hardware, right? So I think that whole ecosystem is great to watch. You know, now looking at it again from a Monero standpoint, totally different equation and story, right? And the way that they've gone about it is, I think that's the top-down approach. They've taken a bottom-up approach, you know, in the development. And, you know, I think you could go on and on here. Two key things, though. Monero has a lot of transactional volume compared to some of these other cryptocurrencies where people are maybe more storing value. And I think that people can see that that results in a lot of theories out there, a lot of economic research showing that, okay, that transactional volume creates a form of stability, right? Now, on the other hand, I think Monero's technology lends itself to some new out-of-the-box business models, right? And you saw like inklings of it with like, oh, let's mine in your browser without you knowing.
Cell phone.
Yeah, or your cell phone. And
it's always connected. It's always on.
It's always hot now. I don't know why. Like, and so it's just like, you know, taking those, and I think that's where the boundaries come in. And if you can set boundaries to prevent the nefarious activity so that people can come in and say, hey, what if I want to create an app that you yourself get to choose to like mine some of your CPU power and get some Monero and then like send that to a charity? I think this is where I'm interested to see how things develop, and where do we set these economic incentives, and how do we use that to control the development? I mean, I'm saying control, but like to guide the development of these technology, you know, this financial technology.
And also disincentivize any, you know, concentration or takeover. Because again, if China took over Bitcoin, the value would go to zero. And so that's the incentive there. That's not that they're benevolent, great, you know, selfless people. I'm not under that impression, but the economic incentive is if, you know, if something happens to Bitcoin and they're the biggest miners, they're the biggest economic benefactors of that activity, that's going to go away. So they don't want that. That's why you don't see 51% attacks from big manufacturers, although they could. The opportunity cost is so much that they don't do it.
Well, I mean, right now, I mean, for them, it's, you know, it's minuscule, right? For them, I mean, I don't think they really care about its value right now. If anything, maybe they just want to potentially keep it alive and hope to control it as it grows. But maybe that would work against them anyway, because they wouldn't be able to.
Well, I think there's still enough value in there that they do care. It's not that insignificant. I mean, we're not in 2011 with Bitcoin's market cap being, you know, in the millions. It's still, when you're talking about hundreds of billions, there's a lot of incentive there for people to pay attention and care.
What do you guys think of the recent hack we saw on Twitter? You guys have any?
The Jack Dorsey, the Bitcoin hack, and the Elon Musk, send me Bitcoin.
Yeah, send me Bitcoin and I'll send you back double the amount. And, you know, Biden was tweeting that out.
And I'm still waiting on Elon to get back to me.
I was like, this is great. You know, when I was watching it unfold, it was like all these guys, like Bill Gates is you know, spurring Bitcoin adoption.
Yeah.
COVID-19, interesting.
I think if we look at it from a purely crypto promotion awareness, I think it's great. And I'm not condoning hacking any global social media platform for nefarious purposes. Don't, you know.
It seemed like a failed thing, though. Like they could have done so much more.
No, just look at the accounts they hacked. It was very targeted and for a very specific political reason.
Mm-hmm.
Just look. So picture this. You're in control of Twitter's admin backend, and you're able to post from any account anything. And there have been so many scenarios that could have been economically devastating globally. Yeah. Not just to US or to Twitter, but globally. They could have destroyed any publicly listed conglomerate in a span of 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Just like destroy, completely out of business, wrecked. trillions of dollars of damage done. They didn't. Why? Because it was a very targeted, specific hack targeting certain entities and with political goals. And so was it executed flawlessly? No. I mean, most hackers are at that level, guns for hire. So they give you access and then they walk away. I mean, they're not going to sit there and do anything more. And the people behind it, are they the greatest strategists and the smartest people? Probably not. Or they were very, very restrained, either way. But, I think it accomplished what it set to do.
Which is what, just promote Bitcoin?
No, no, just no. They probably lost money. The amount of social engineering and setting up and investment it took to pull it off. They were saying they didn't.
How much did they make out with? Like 100 grand?
Yeah, 117. And there's some speculation that the initial few Bitcoins they sent it themselves to show that the people were sending money and like it's a real thing. So yeah, I don't think economics were the reason why it was done. I think it was more political. But I'm glad it didn't work to the extent that it could have and caused a lot of damage. What do I think of it? It shows that any system can be hacked. I've always said that, when people say this is unhackable or this is impenetrable or this is undoable, I always put my engineer, software, hardware, whatever, social engineer hat on, and I'm like, it can be hacked. Any system can be hacked if you understand it well enough and if you have enough time to execute on a solid strategy. And I think Twitter was social engineering, economic incentivization of internal resources, and hardcore, code hack too. So, I mean, it's scary.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, as I'm talking to you about it, you're giving me new thoughts. So I think it shows how, how powerful, we already knew how powerful these companies were, but now it's like you're really witnessing, like you said, I mean, they could have destroyed any company essentially within 20 minutes. So do you think maybe it's showing, the future business model of why something like a more decentralized version of Twitter would make sense? Something like, a Twitter on the blockchain, or Twitter running on top of Bitcoin or Monero, some version that, so essentially, censorship resistant, people can be passing their messages around, but without the fear of everything being centralized where you can take over the entire system. Is it evidence of that?
I mean, I think a lot about this kind of stuff. And I think, I don't know, you might have different thoughts, Brad, but I feel like it comes down to a lot of people are eager to put stuff on a blockchain, and most of those applications are just glorified. Like, you could have just used a MySQL database. And it comes down to, is a nation state going to want to hack your system? If so, if there's an incentive for somebody like a nation state to want to hack your system, then yeah, maybe it belongs on a decentralized blockchain. If not, then, and there might be different degrees of that. Maybe there's not a nation state trying to come after your database, but maybe there is some company, that's like, pretty sizable and they got resources. So I think at different levels, that's where I put, in my personal belief, where the sliding scale of how decentralized should your system and your app and your, et cetera, be is comes down to who's trying to hack it. And with Twitter, that's a complicated one, because I think most people, they're not trying to, nobody's trying to hack into my Twitter. I'll tell you that. But, they might spend a lot of money if they had to store all my tweets on a public blockchain. Maybe Donald Trump's tweets, I don't know, maybe different story, or like Bill Gates. I think that's kind of where I think about it.
I think I'm more of a proponent for decentralization. So I think there are two very important reasons why large social platforms do belong on the blockchain. And one is ownership of your own data and persona. Like if you're online profile was attached to a private key and you controlled it, no one could impersonate you. I mean, they'd have to literally steal your private key, which there are ways to do it, but it would be much more difficult. Whenever you have very rich and deep data buckets, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it, they are prime targets for hacking, because once you hack and have access, there's so much you can do. I mean, you can create economically beneficial outcomes from it. You can create politically beneficial outcomes, socially. I mean, it's a lot of power. So do I think that data should be spread out and be decentralized and inaccessible by a hack like this? Absolutely. I mean, I've been SIM swapped 8 times, and every time it was targeted and very specifically designed to steal, crypto and cash online from my accounts. Because I do have a background in security and how those things are done. I didn't lose anything, but it was still inconvenient to see my, phone go dark and have to deal with the carrier to fix it. Now, if the carrier was decentralized and they had to hack my phone or my node specifically to get my information, it wouldn't have happened, because hacking, especially in a nefarious context, is a numbers game. You don't hack a system if you think you can only get one thing out of it. You hack a system when you know there's 10,000 potential targets, and you say, okay, if I can hit 1% of that, that's like 100. If I can gain access to half of that, it's a numbers game. So by decentralizing these systems, we can protect data better. Now, technologically, it's much more difficult to do it. It's much more bandwidth and data heavy to decentralize some of these centralized systems. So just like Amir said, is it economically viable to do it for everyone and every system? Probably not yet. But 5 years ago, it wasn't economically viable to stream 4K video over any device. And now I have it on my phone. I have it on my TV. My son has it on his tablet. Everyone is streaming high def because the hardware and infrastructure caught up with it. And I think we're going to do the same thing in blockchain, where the hardware and infrastructure is going to catch up. And then it is going to make sense to have things decentralized and safer, and not have these massive hacks where someone can tweet as Bill Gates, or someone can have access to hundreds of millions of social security numbers and birth dates and addresses, everything you need to apply for credit or get a bank or do all those financial things that are very important. That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree, with Amir in that it's very hard to find a scenario where it makes sense to use a blockchain. The Twitter thing, though, with what just happened, really does start to make it seem like it might be a viable concept. I mean, protection of that.
Brad just mentioned something I wasn't thinking about, is like the value proposition of just identity on the internet. I don't think we've solved that yet. Like, we've gotten money onto the internet, which is great, but like, can I have my identity be protected in like a public key format such that I could, for example, even anonymously, not even just my identity, but can I make a pseudo, an identity and then go on the internet and just, make an argument? And there's no like centralized, centralized is the wrong word, but there's no like repository for identity verification, or a place where I can,
at least globally.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist.
Well, isn't that like Civic? Is Civic trying to do that or no?
There's several projects. Civic solved for one aspect of it.
Brad, you're invested in some of these as well, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'm invested in over 100 blockchain projects, and I support them. We built and actively contributed to 50 plus in the past 4 or so years with Beyond Enterprises. So, I always ask the same question Amir asks when someone comes and says, Brad, I'm going to build, Match.com on blockchain. I'm like, do you really need blockchain? What is it like? What is the essential argument for using a more complicated, costlier, harder to maintain technology? as opposed to a simple centralized one. And if there's an argument and it makes sense, we build it and we launch it. If it doesn't, then we build it with the traditional tech stack and launch it. Hey, cheaper, faster, easier to maintain.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to have always weighed on the side of, money is really the first app that we need to get right, and it obviously certainly makes sense. The incentives are all there for that to work. I mean, you're cutting out the middleman of the banks and governments, and that's a huge value. And then my thought was always that would then become the backbone of this new decentralized world, and things would be built on top of it. Do you see it as that way? I mean, Brad, you're actively investing in these blockchain companies. What do you see as kind of being the future of this new decentralized world? I do think a lot of the things you're talking about will eventually come to fruition. I kind of see it like the .com bubble, where we had all the ideas in the 90s, but none of them came to fruition at the time because the infrastructure just wasn't ready for it. But now we're seeing all those ideas actually come into reality. I mean, something like, YouTube or whatever, even, Uber, was probably even thought of back then, but, wouldn't have worked until now. So how do you see it structurally working in the future? Is it going to be separate blockchains, or are we going to congeal towards a couple of backbone systems that are running everything and then apps are built on top?
I think we started with money, with Bitcoin, with value transfer over the internet. Did we have to? No. We could have started with identity. We could have started with governance. But of course, economic value transfer is interesting for everyone, for more people than...
Yeah, but would you, you were there in 2009. Would you went in and ran and plugged in all those miners but for it being about,
so I'm just saying we started with money. I'm agreeing with you. That's a good backbone to proliferate from. And I think the next two big ones are identity and governance. And we have a couple projects in that space. But once we can have online sovereign identity for all individuals and entities, then you're going to be able to both have value transfers, either with Monero or Bitcoin or whichever flavor of blockchain you like. And then you're going to have identity. Now you can not only transact, but you can contract, you can get into agreements, you can do a lot more. And then governance is going to probably be the third one in my mind. Once you can have an organization run in a decentralized way, because then you're able to plug in AI components to it. Like if you have a DAO that works by itself, not all the participants and stakeholders are going to be, they're not going to be humans. There's going to be some AI there, there's going to be some machines, some sensors, some things like that. And it becomes very interesting at that point where now we don't have to control and manage AIs and computers and machines, but we can work collaboratively with them. Because you have a system that's decentralized, and some of the stakeholders are humans, some of the stakeholders are entities, some of the stakeholders are machines, and they all collaborate in this ecosystem. And I think once we have those three, then we can create a completely decentralized society, and it's that dream of living anywhere in the world and having access to everything you have right now, whether it be entertainment, transportation, and things like that. Of course, now I'm expanding into drones and AI and machine learning, not just blockchain, but all those technologies are growing together in my head in a way. Like right now, we live in cities because we want access to a nice supermarket, and we want access to a movie theater, although they're all closed right now, or to be able to go to a nice restaurant. Well, if you could hop on a drone and go to the city in 15 minutes, you would live in the woods and would still have the same access, because now the physical access problem is solved. And of course, if you have drones, it has to be decentralized, because human beings are not going to be able to navigate through a busy skyline of, even with planes now, there are some close calls that we don't even hear about. But imagine if air traffic tripled, quadrupled, tenfolded. It's not going to be possible for a human pilot to know what everything around is and react to it. But with a decentralized model, it's possible. So we are going to see more and more decentralization in transportation, procurement, as the core backbone infrastructure becomes more reliable and widely accepted.
Listen, I could talk to you guys forever. I mean, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having us.
And your thoughts. Let me ask you one last question, though. So obviously I'm running for Congress, and this question is just coming to mind as I'm speaking to you. You guys are obviously both very extremely active in the crypto world. What would you like to see from your government, from a government in the world, preferably the United States, that would allow for crypto to blossom? I mean, what do you think needs to happen? How does America, we're talking about this future decentralized world. What the future state looks like, I do not know, but what can the state, what can America do to stay relevant and kind of stay ahead of the game and stand to benefit from this and live in a symbiosis with crypto? What are some things that can be done?
So one word: sandboxes. And I'm going to elaborate because that's not going to make a lot of sense by in itself. We advise governments, smaller governments like Malta, Ukraine, UAE, things like that on blockchain and its potential positive impacts and potential challenges that it may present to the existing infrastructures. And I think I would want to see United States lead the development, the progress in technology, not to be a follower 5 years behind. And unfortunately, as far as blockchain is concerned, it's been feeling like we're just following behind on everyone else innovating. So we need to create more sandboxes and allow people to do things. I'm not saying change the rules. I understand our regulatory framework is very slow to change and requires a lot of steps to be fulfilled, and that's by design. That's how our forefathers wanted things to move slowly, so there's not coups and drastic changes. But I think the biggest thing we can do is have open sandboxes, which have worked in other countries beautifully, and give exemptions to people experimenting. Someone wants to do an ICO, let him do an ICO. Let him do a sandbox and put the necessary educational pieces, warnings attached to it, and say, hey, if you're putting $100 in this project, you're going to lose it. Not even there may be a return. You're going to lose it. Are you okay putting it? And if people want to support that, let them play in the sandbox. Let's see the socioeconomic impact of that model, and then create the legal framework around it. And also, I would love to see 100 more people like you in the Congress who actually own crypto, who understand what it is, and have at least an open mind about it. They don't have to be very positive and gung-ho about it like us, but at least have a positive, because right now, everyone, whether it's the lobbyists or the people who are our representatives, this is an unknown. So they get their information from their lobbyists who are being paid by big banks and people who are not going to benefit from decentralization on how to regulate and how to stop it. And, if you already start with an adverse stance to something, obviously the outcome is not going to be positive, right? If I go into a game and I'm like, I'm going to lose this, I'm not ready, I'm going to lose that game. But if I go in saying I'm going to win this, I may still lose, but at least I have the best chance because I'm believing in the strategy I'm coming to the table with, and I want to execute to the fullest of my ability. Right now, that doesn't exist in the US. I mean, we have a couple lobbying groups for crypto and blockchain that are trying to make our voices heard, and I'm supporting them both, personally and financially, but they're not strong enough. So we need more people before legislating on something. Go get a wallet, use it, like send some Bitcoin to someone, experience it, see what it is, and then put on your legislator hat and start thinking about how can we make this experience the safest, the most positive for our constituents. I think that's the change we need. More sandboxes and more people who like technology, who want to see a change for the better, and have those people work on this, as opposed to, people who have no interest in any innovation, and they just want to keep the status quo because they're either personally vested in some of those older technologies, or their lobbyists are, or their constituents are, and they're like, it's like the coal versus renewable conversation. I mean, no one needs to burn coal anymore. We've passed that 200 years ago. I mean, right now we can power the whole world on renewables and solar. And why aren't we doing that? Because people are entrenched economically on the other side of it, and they're like, oh, I need to make more money. Well, guess what? If you took your $5 million investment in your coal mine and put it in a solar farm, you're going to make more money in the long run, because it's an unlimited resource. The sun is always going to come and shine. I mean, not always, but for our lifetimes, let's say always. So why don't we see that change? Because the legislators are not supporting change. They're like supporting the status quo. And I'd love to, see that change, because we are the greatest nation in the world, and let's not lose our number one spot just because we're scared of change or don't really welcome it the right way.
That's awesome.
Man, well said, right?
Amir, you have any comment there?
Honestly, no. I mean, the thing I was going to say, I guess, is just would be a result of if we had more educated legislatures and, proper sandboxes for, legislators and lawmakers to be able to understand and grasp the technology. I mean, I'm in my own little bubble. So the thing that I immediately thought of was incentivizing the chip industry within the country, because we don't let, Russia make our
bullets
and bullets. Yeah. And so why would we want China to be making our money infrastructure? And I think that now that we're entering this,
that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and it would create jobs, and it would create
high-paying jobs. Because you're talking about high tech here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we should really be owning it. We should be incentivizing, subsidizing, whatever it makes sense, obviously. But I'm not a lawmaker. But that's where my brain goes in terms of that's what we would put us ahead and allow us to compete with China. For example.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. I like it. Listen, gentlemen, this is a great conversation. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
Where can people learn more about you guys?
For me, they can go to beyondenterprises.com with a Z. That's our advisory business. And any questions, I'm Brad at Beyond Enterprises. So shoot an email, find me on Telegram. I'm available. It's my name and last name on Telegram, and Amir is alphamine.io and Amir at alphamine.io.
Yep. I'm sure there's going to be links right on this podcast. And I'm on Telegram as Amir of Crypto, but man, I get so much spam on Telegram these days. It's just email is much better.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'll add your Twitter links.
Okay.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. Have a good one.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode. We release new episodes every week. You can find and subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you have an Alexa device, you can tell it to listen to the latest episode of the Monero Talk podcast. Go to monerotalk.live/subscribe for a full list of places where you can watch and listen. If you want to interact with us, guests, or other podcast listeners, you can follow us on Twitter. And please leave us a review on iTunes. It helps people find the show, and we are always happy to read them. So thanks so much, and we look forward to being back next week.